and western parts of Scotland. Meanwhile, it starts to become drier and clearer from the south behind that rain, with a mixture of bright or sunny spells and a few scattered showers. And that continues through Thursday evening and into Thursday night as well. A few showers lingering, quite a lot of cloud around, still fairly breezy, and yet another batch of showery rains begins to push in from the west. So remaining very changeable and unsettled over the next few days. But again, look at those overnight temperatures, more like the sort of temperatures we would expect by day at this stage of October. So for Friday, a pretty wet and windy day, especially for western and northern parts of the country. Some very heavy bursts of rain at times, especially across parts of Scotland. And elsewhere, a mixture of bright spells and a few showers. And that story continues through the weekend, with temperatures remaining above average. Bye for now.
Hey, welcome along to the Mark Steyn Show. Prime Ministers come and Lord Privy Seals go, but underneath those surface distractions, the deeper currents are always moving and not in a good direction. Do you like the idea of being fined if you drive more than 5 miles from your home. Well, it's our ruler's latest spiffing wheeze. It's underway in English towns. You're going nowhere. Somebody help you. Somebody help you, yeah. You're staying in your drive. Lois Perry is here and she's going to take that one out for a spin. Oh, and just for Lois, after 6 weeks of Liz, Rishi's first act is to restore the fracking ban. Because you're not cold enough yet and your energy bills aren't high enough yet. It's all part of the Great Reset. Best-selling author Michael Walsh will kick that around. He's got his new book out, Against the Great Reset. And did Vladimir Putin, aided by his sinister henchwoman Liz Truss, Rosa Klebb to Putin's Blofeld? Are Rosa Truss and Ernst Stavro Putin, there they are. Are they responsible for the ruination you see all about? Or could there be some other explanation? Jamie Jenkins is all over that, and despite the groupthink British media, the narrative shifts. We'll explore that with Alexandra Marshall. Plus, the most important part of the show, you. What's your take? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. Grab yourself a cuppa or a snifter, according to taste. It's all coming your way after Polly Middlehurst with the latest news.
Mark, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight. Rishi Sunak has vowed to rebuild public finances in a way that's fair and compassionate. In his first Prime Minister's questions, Mr Sunak promised to protect the most vulnerable as he addressed what he called the mistakes of his predecessor, Liz Truss. In the House of Commons today, the debate was dominated, though, by the reappointment of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, after she breached the ministerial code last week and then resigned. The Prime Minister defended his decision to reappoint her, whilst the Labour leader questioned it.
The Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor.
Well, the Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks, moving it to the 17th of November. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be announced next Monday, will be upgraded now to an autumn statement, taking into account the latest forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility as well. Mr Hunt says he's already demonstrated he is willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're in the national interest.
Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer-term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5-week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
And in another U-turn on Liz Truss's policies, the new Prime Minister confirmed he will be reinstating the ban on fracking in England. Rishi Sunak told the House of Commons today he stands by the Conservative 2019 manifesto banning drilling for shale gas. Now, in other news today, the Mayor and Deputy Mayor of Greater Manchester have said they welcome the decision to send 2 men from a Rochdale grooming gang back to Pakistan, but said it's taken too long. The gang members, Adil Khan and Kari Abdul Rauf, were both convicted of a series of sex offences against young girls in 2012. They fought a legal battle to stay in the UK on the grounds of their human rights, but have now lost a deportation appeal. Immigration judges said Khan showed a breathtaking lack of remorse. And GB News has been told the authorities fear a migrant processing centre in Kent could erupt into serious disorder due to the living conditions inside. The RAF facility near Ramsgate is reportedly overcrowded, with some migrants spending far longer there than it would normally take to process them. Fights and assaults on staff are a regular occurrence at the base, along with outbreaks of illness. There were 7 security incidents last night alone, we're told, and an independent inspector said he was left speechless when he witnessed the conditions. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Mark Steyn.
Thank you, Polly. Let's start with a couple of quick updates to previous shows. We talk a lot about migrants on this show. Here's an arresting statistic out of the Home Affairs Committee this week. 1 to 2% of the entire male population of Albania have moved here on small boats in the last year. So the good news is that if that keeps up, in 50 years there'll be no Albanian men in Albania and it'll be safe for the rest of us to move there. Here's a topic that Polly mentioned and which we cover every week, because not to cover it is to be complicit. The serial gang rape of thousands of English girls in towns up and down the land. A postscript to the hell of Rochdale, as Polly just reported on GB News. Rochdale grooming gang members lose appeal against deportation from UK to Pakistan. Adil Khan, 51, and Abdul Rauf, 52, have lost their appeal. Immigration judges have ruled. So after 10 years of legalistic jousting, Mr. Khan and Mr. Rauf are headed home. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, by the way. When I read that headline about Messrs. Khan and Rauf being deported from the UK to Pakistan, I meant, of course, to say that they're being deported from the UK to Asia. Whether the People's Republic of Asia or the Sultanate of Asia or the Islamic Emirate of Asia is not yet known. But they'll be taken to whichever Heathrow terminal flights to Asia General Vicinity International Airport leave from. Yesterday, we interviewed a primary school teacher who lost her job because she did not wish to go along with the school's all-out affirmation of an 8-year-old girl who presents as a boy. She took her sacking to court, and in our last exchange, I wondered whether the judges, like the educational establishment, might already be all in on the trans mania. So it has proved. The High Court has rejected Hannah's application for judicial review on the grounds that child X is, quote, young and vulnerable. Indeed, that is one reason why no prudent society would sign on to the accelerated transitioning of its infants. But our society is bonkers. Give me a boy till 7, said the Jesuits, and I will show you the man. Give me a boy till 7, say today's teachers, and I will show you the girl. In the last few days, NHS England has clarified its position on this issue. Headline from the Daily Telegraph this week: most children who think they're transgender are just going through a phase, says NHS. Unfortunately, that's not how the schools, the courts, the Church of England, 1.5 of our 2 biggest political parties see it. In 20 years' time, we will have a lot of profoundly unhappy, mutilated, infertile young adults who will hate us for what the madness of the moment did to them. There was a very interesting discussion, actually, on Dubes earlier this evening, right here at GB News, with Michelle's 2 guests. And it was interesting to me that the left-wing fellow was obviously a bit queasy about it, kept saying he'd much rather go back to talking about the economy. But this is a big thing, bigger than the Westminster soap opera. Hard as it may be to believe, but the abolition of biological sex, which is what's going on here, is bigger than who this week's Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is, and indeed even bigger than, I don't know, who was that guy there? Is that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster? I have no interest in whoever that guy is. Don't ever put that picture of him up again. I don't know. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is not important. The abolition of biological sex is. An Australian view of this show points out something that this story has in common with another big topic, so-called detransitioners, people who change their minds about transitioning. They're ignored and silenced and ridiculed in much the same way that victims of the COVID vaccines are. In both cases, they're groups of people who have been left permanently crippled by the rigorously enforced groupthink of our time. We've covered those bereaved and injured by the vaccines all year on this show, since it first emerged that these crappy state-ordered medical products don't prevent you catching the disease and don't prevent you passing on the disease. Real people, your neighbours, your fellow citizens, have been ruined by the media groupthink of these last 2 years, but the narrative is shifting, not as fast as it should, but shifting nonetheless in very interesting ways. Here's Danny Kruger, MP for Devizes, speaking in the House of Commons and with a partial mea culpa for his own acquiescence to the groupthink.
And while many questions need to be answered about our COVID response, it's by no means the worst offender. We're not Canada or New Zealand or China, places where they think they can exterminate COVID by depriving the population of the most basic civil liberties. But we still do have, I'm afraid, questions to ask ourselves, and even much to be ashamed of. I'm particularly ashamed, and I put it on record in hindsight, of my own vote to dismiss the care workers who didn't want to take the vaccine. And I very much hope that the 40,000 care workers who lost their jobs can be reinstated and indeed compensated.
One MP who says he is ashamed of his vote to wreck the lives of all those people who had the good sense not to take this, at best, worthless, and at worst, potentially fatally harmful vaccine. This is important. With both the transmania and the vaccines, the state should not be colluding in the crippling of its citizens. The last 3 years have been pretty bum years for what we used to think of as core Western liberties. Freedom of speech can seem pretty abstract to a lot of people. You may have no desire to express a contrarian opinion on, say, Islam or climate change or immigration or gender identity or the ever-lengthening list of topics on which the rough and tumble of open debate is ever more shriveled and constrained. But freedom of movement is something we can all understand. If you open up your passport, you'll see these magnificent words. His Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State requests and requires, in the name of His Majesty, all those whom it may concern to allow the bearer to pass freely without let or hindrance. That's let in the medieval sense of an impediment. And in case you haven't noticed these days, there are all kinds of lets and hindrances to your free passage everywhere you turn. I'm not just talking about taking a week in Mallorca, but at one point during lockdown, Welsh police closed down the border to motorists from England. Under Brexit, you can't have a hard border between Northern Ireland and the South. Under COVID, you can have a hard border between England and Wales. It gets better. You can't have a hard border at Derry-Halla between the United Kingdom and the European Union, but you can have a hard border within the city of Oxford. Mr. Duncan Enright is the Oxford Council member responsible for travel strategy. And if you thought travel meant the right to travel to, say, Warwickshire, in your dreams, pal. Mr. Enright has divided the city of Oxford into 6 zones. And if you drive your car from Zone A to Zone B or Zone F to Zone D, you're going to be fined. Canterbury has come up with a similar plan. Lois Perry of car26.org is back with us, and we are always happy to see us. Lois, this is the sort of thing you wouldn't have been surprised of if communist Romania had introduced it in the 1980s. It's a bit weird to see it introduced in Oxford.
Welcome to dystopia. All our cities will probably end up now being broken up into precincts like sci-fi films that were made predicting a dystopian future. You can't even travel into your next couple of roads now. There's going to be fines if you leave your area or your 15-minute zone more than twice a week. Imagine how many people that's going to disenfranchise. Imagine women with small children who are being forced to go out in the rain and the snow to the supermarket because it's just outside of their zone. It's absolutely terrifying. And I tell you what, when we're forced, well, a few of us, because most of us won't be able to afford it, into electric vehicles, those electric vehicles won't even go past the border. They'll be programmed so they don't. So you won't even be able to get the fine. It's terrifying, Mark. It really is.
Well, you don't even have to wait for the electric vehicle. I took a rental car from Budapest to drive into Ukraine a few months ago, and the car had been programmed in order to prevent me driving it into the war zone. The car had been programmed to die at the border. I couldn't figure out what had happened. It just stopped. And as I think I said on this show back then, if you think that's just going to be applied to Ukraine, no. It's going to be applied to Billingsgate and Birmingham and Ballymena. And in fact, I think Joe Biden has just made it mandatory that all American cars have to have a kill switch in them by 2026. So there is actually now a governmental war on freedom of movement.
Freedom of movement. We talked before about you will own nothing and you will be happy. Well, you will go nowhere and you will be happy. I mean, how are people supposed to get to work? Or maybe that's the idea. We don't need to go to work because we can sit at home, staring at the screen, work from home. Everyone got used to that during the COVID test bed for all of these insane totalitarian policies. This is England, and we've had the big globalist coup that's just happened. We've had Rishi Sunak placed in, our dear leader, and now we're being broken up into precincts. It's all obviously what you said before was very prophetic about your experience with the rental car. It's happening now. It's happening a lot quicker than everybody thought it was. And the whole 2030 vehicle ban on ICE vehicles, I can completely see what it's about now. Nothing to do with saving the planet. Everything about control. But I'm going in with Howard Cox from Fairfuel UK to see Mark Harper, who's the Transport Minister. I'm supposed to be. Whether he lets me in the door or not after seeing me tonight, I don't know, or seeing some of my YouTube clips. But anyway, if they do let me in by some, fateful reason, I will be saying to him, this is dystopia, this is not British, and you should be ashamed. This needs to be sorted out. It must be illegal, surely, Mark.
Well, I would have thought so, but you might well find that as you attempt to enter the Ministry of Transport, that you're informed that you're now outside your zone and you have to return to your tiny little zone and just stay there. While we're talking about the government, which is pretty much always a waste of time, but it's surely distressing to you that the first act of Mr. Sunak's ministry, for 6 weeks under the now reviled Liz Truss, we were briefly liberated and the fracking ban was lifted, and now Rishi has reimposed it.
He's reimposed it, but he said that he's enforcing the 2019 manifesto, which is pretty strange to me, because in the 2019 manifesto, it does talk about it being that fracking being looked at if it was safe to do so. And I've been looking at videos of Rishi Sunak during the leadership campaign today, where he said to, I think it was Kay Burley on Sky, that he felt that fracking was completely safe, and all of the geological societies and all of the royal societies had said that it was safe to do so, and he supported fracking. That was 2-3 months ago. What's changed? It's absolute lunacy. Anyway, we all knew this was going to happen, didn't we? We all know they don't want energy independence. If you're going to have a globalist reset, God forbid we have any energy independence, because then we might have industry. And if we have industry, we're not on a social credit system, and we're not dependent on digital handouts from the government, which is obviously the plan.
Yeah, but their plan obviously is you should be a lot colder, so we're not going to have fracking. And you shouldn't be able to ameliorate the cold by taking a weekend by the seaside, so you're not going to be able to leave your designated zone. I'll be impressed if you get into the Ministry of Transport, Lois. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And you must come back and report on what it was like.
I will, I promise.
Okay, she's right about this stuff. In a nation that was once the crucible of liberty, the idea that the government can designate the zone in which you're obliged to remain is completely ludicrous. Always great to see you, Lois. But let's make that clear. Accepting the right of the state to forbid your free movement within 15 minutes of your home is not a small thing. And if you treat it like a small thing and you string along with it, you're going to get a lot more of it. That's one of the lessons of the last 3 years. We're going to get into your comments next. GBViews at gbnews.uk. And who is to blame for the general wasteland all about us? Is it Vladimir Putin and his sinister henchwoman Liz Truss? We're going to mull that with our stats man, Jamie Jenkins. He's here. And we have more on the Great Reset. It is real and it's underway. Michael Walsh, best-selling authors, here on that. And Alexandra Marshall on the shifting narrative and a touch of regret. Don't touch that dial, because you never know what horrors are lurking on some of these other channels. We'll be right back.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, man.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
GB News is the People's Channel, so let us channel what the people are saying. We wanted to know your thoughts on the Great Fact Track. GW says, why bother? We're just letting Global Corp extract it from under our feet for free, plus tax, and sell it on the international market. Globo Corp, I think that's Rishi, isn't that Rishi Sunak's family business? I think his father-in-law is the chairman of Globo Corp. Globo Corp. What a nice, sinister-sounding name that is, GW. Norman says Putin must be over the moon. Yeah, it's fantastic strategy, this. Let's destroy any alternatives to non-Russian energy sources, because that'll really teach Putin we may mean business. Frank says, bye-bye Tories, reform are going to be the next government. Whoa. Is that reflected in the opinion polls? Right now it's looking like 500 seats to Labour, and the official opposition would be the Scottish National Party on whatever it is, 52 seats. Wet Wang Warrior, possibly not his real name, although you never know these days, says either Putin is Rishi's new best friend or Rishi cares nothing for UK energy security. More likely he's already in hock to the eco lobby. He may need Caroline Greenthing to prop up his majority in the future. Whatever his reason, it's his worst strategic decision so far. And Margaret says, I will fight against fracking with every ounce of strength I have. It is dangerous to us and the land. So that's almost Churchillian, Margaret. We shall frack on the beaches, we shall frack on the landing grounds. But not Margaret. She will fight against fracking with every ounce of strength she possesses. Oh, we have an important news update. Let's face it, everything's screwed. So thank you and good night. But why is that? Here's the new Prime Minister.
Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy markets and supply chains the world over. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless.
So it's all the fault of a malign alliance between Putin and Truss. They're the Hitler-Stalin pact of our times. But is that actually true? Jamie Jenkins is formerly of the Office for National Statistics, and it's great to see him. You made a very sharp point in one of your tweets, Jamie, where you basically said we're entitled to honest government, and this stuff actually isn't honest.
Well, he's kind of being disingenuous, kind of blaming everything on kind of Putin. I think I agree with Rishi Sunak in some of what he was saying there, Mark. He was saying that mistakes have been made and we've got this kind of, the aftermath of COVID is a big factor in this kind of cost of living crisis that we're going through. But let's remind ourselves, who was the Chancellor through the kind of the COVID pandemic, who dished out all of this money? You know, we saw a huge £400 billion coming from the Treasury. Some of that obviously was needed through the kind of the pandemic, but furlough went on far too long. We had too many packages, lots of fraud going on. So one mistake there, really right on Rishi's desk. Now, Moving King, Moving King, the former governor of the Bank of England, was speaking on I think another show over the weekend with Laura Koonsberg. And he actually kind of laid into the Bank of England now for a former governor of the Bank of England to lay into them. And he said basically that there was a huge mistake to have printed all of that money during lockdowns, where countries were kind of contracting in terms of their economy, printing loads of money. And that's a big factor in the inflation crisis. So where is Rishi Sunak talking about his policies, the Bank of England policies? It's quite easy to go on, blame Putin for everything. And remember, Mark, a lot of the issues with Putin is actually because of what the UK and the European Union have put sanctions on Russia. So they've actually a big factor in that as well.
Yep. Yep, and it's interesting, you said you agreed with him about COVID, but actually even that line is a bit disingenuous, because we're not economically clobbered by the COVID, we're economically clobbered by the government's response to the COVID, including this printing of £500 billion as a way of getting people through the lockdown measures. But he can't be honest about that because he was the guy signing off on all that.
Well, indeed, he starts off saying we're in an economic crisis, and the facts are laid bare. I totally agree with what you're saying there, Mark. This is more of a cost of lockdown crisis rather than just a cost of living crisis. Lockdowns across the world, they're still going on. Things in places like China, any COVID cases, they continue. That disrupts kind of global supply chains there, Mark. It's difficult to restart when you lock the country down as well. Remember, you can't just open up overnight. Even the airline industry is still struggling to kind of get back to where they were before because they laid off a lot of staff to try and do things cheaper. And so you've got different people blaming different things. And the other thing that kind of winds me up a bit, Mark, as well, is if it's not kind of anything to do with Putin, it's to do with Brexit. So if you look at the UK inflation rate now, it's currently lower than Germany. Germany have got a higher kind of fiscal package to support the energy bailout in Germany. They've got a shortage of workers, and they're heading towards a recession. Now, I don't remember Germany voting for Brexit either, or coming for Jersey, or whatever you want to call it. They're still in the European Union, and they're in a much worse place than what the UK is. So people are blaming all these different things rather than looking a bit closer to home and looking at the Bank of England and looking at the Treasury, who are two key factors in why we're in such a mess at the moment.
Well, when you say that all the industries are having difficulty getting back out of the lockdown, and you cited the airline industry at Heathrow, the baggage handling is a catastrophe. People are waiting weeks to get their bags back. In France, they have no air traffic controllers, so if you don't have like a 7 a.m. flight when the first shift kicks in, you're not going to be getting your 2 o'clock flight because they've all gone home by then. This is the cost, is it not, of people like Rishi Sunak and his equivalents in Europe paying people to stay home. It's the cost of people learn that, I might not make as much money as I did when I had to go to work 5 days a week, but I don't have to go to work. And so being paid to stay at home, even if it's less, is worth it for me. And that's on Rishi Sunak too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on Rishi Sunak, Mark, and it goes back before Rishi Sunak as well. You look at the tax credit system we have in the UK. For a lot of people, it pays to actually work part-time. So when you're looking in terms of the numbers of people actively available for work in the UK, well, we're topping up a load of people's wages with kind of tax credits through the benefit system. So that has an impact in the number of people that we've got. I think, honest, I suppose we're at that point now where Liz Truss, it was laughable that people were saying the mini budget was a big factor in this. That's absolute nonsense as far as I'm concerned. We talked last week about the US putting up interest rates, and the Bank of England will have to follow. That's going to put up mortgage costs for people as well. So people have got to start looking a bit closer to home. Rishi Sunak, let's give him a chance. Let's see what he can sort out. But I hope, Mark, if we're talking in about 6 to 12 months' time, he can sort out the migrant crisis that's coming over as well. He's got a lot on his plate. But he just needs to be honest with people and not blame everything about everybody else abroad.
Well, he's promised to solve the migrant crisis in the next 100 days. So that's the end of January. And for everything else, we're being asked to believe that this Rishi Sunak is entirely unrelated to the other Rishi Sunak who was around a year or two back. They're two completely different people. That's why we need Rishi Sunak 2.0 to solve the hell created by the original Rishi Sunak. You're quite right about that. That line of yours that we need honest government. I think if it's all going to be terrible, so it could at least be honest. Thank you very much, JB. It's always great to see you. We like to talk about the Great Reset on this show, and whenever we do, highly respected BBC presenters such as Dr. Matthew Sweet, PhD. Has he got a knighthood yet? Give that man a knighthood. People such as Dr. Sweet say we're promoting a conspiracy theory from the 70s. Actually, no. The Great Reset was launched in 2020 by the World Economic Forum website under that name. And yes, that's right. That's the then Prince of Wales who's there with Klaus Schwab, lending the imprimatur of the House of Windsor to the Great Reset.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
His Majesty the King. The Great Reset starts at the very top. By the way, when the Sovereign says that each and every one of us has a vital role to play, your vital role is working less, earning less, driving less, eating less, heating less. Michael Walsh is a best-selling author and the editor of a brand new book called Against the Great Reset, which features essays by 18 different people, some of whom, such as Conrad Black, you'll be familiar with from this show. Michael, the Great Reset is a thing. How ambitious is it?
It's not only a thing, but it's a very big thing. And it's such a big thing, Mark, that for the last several years, people who are part of the thing are telling us that it doesn't actually exist and it's an all vast right-wing conspiracy, despite the fact that you can see it on their website. And they tell us exactly what they're going to do.
No, and that was just the King taking part in a Klaus Schwab video called The Great Reset.
That's right. And they used COVID as a beta test for how they want to control populations. And I must say, we all passed with flying colors. We gave up our First Amendment rights. We were like sheep herded into pens. We were forced to wear face masks to go anywhere. So it's been a great success from their point of view. But the slogan that they adopt cheerily is, "You'll own nothing and be happy."
Yes.
So that's the future they want for us. How do you like them apples?
Well, I'm slightly surprised, as you may be too, because I'd always thought there were great differences between Americans and Canadians, and between Swedes and Greeks, and even between Scotsmen and New Zealanders. But in the Western world, it doesn't really seem to have made much difference. We all swallowed it these last 3 years.
Especially the Australians. Where was Crocodile Dundee when we needed him? It was all exposed that this bravado is kind of a lie. The Canadians went under, the Americans certainly did, the Australians, Brits, you name it. We just didn't seem to have the spine to fight these people. And I think because they appeal to our good nature, wear this mask or grandma dies, you know, it's like a Mel Brooks movie almost. We got, okay, well, I'll just wear a mask then. But none of that was necessary, and it was all a giant hoax. I hate to use that word, but in many ways it was a hoax. Yes, some people died, but they tended to be elderly, even older than me, for goodness sake, and have all sorts of comorbidities, and they were vulnerable, and as they are every year, as the elderly population is every year with the bad strain of the flu. But boy, we passed with flying colors as far as Klaus Schwab and the new King of England are concerned.
Well, the King, who was not yet the King when he gave that speech, but what is interesting to me about that video, Klaus Schwab released that video after COVID had only been going for 3 months. So people weren't quite on board with the idea that the 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing was a crock.
Right.
And it was the permanent new normal. So he released that in the spring of 2020. They were amazingly quick to seize the opportunity.
They were. Well, in fact, Schwab and a co-writer of his wrote a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. So it was very clear, if one were of a conspiratorially minded sort of bent, that they used COVID, whether they helped create it or whether they just opportunistically jumped on it, to show us the future. And the future is essentially fascist. So the large corporations, in collaboration with the government, just as in Mussolini's Italy or in Hitler's National Socialist Germany, have colluded together to control the population. And what they want, as you mentioned, is eat less, heat less, do all of that stuff. But the best part is they want you to eat bugs.
Yes.
Now, how yummy does that seem to you? Not to me, but hey.
No,
bugs.
they're actually quite serious about that.
Oh, they're totally serious.
When you talk about Italian fascism, normally when something bad happens to your country and you don't want to go along with it, it is possible to say, well, I'm going to go and live in the hills and just keep my head down for a few years. But to take a country you know very well, Ireland, for example, as part of the Great Reset, basically the Irish state is declaring war on 12,000 years of farming.
Yes.
So they're saying, screw you, English. We don't need you to come in and screw us over on the next potato famine. We're going to do it to ourselves.
That's our job.
Yeah.
Well, you remember, Mark, that the oldest legend in Irish literature, goes way back, is the cattle raid of Cooley. And that's thousands of years old. And cattle is the storehouse of wealth for Ireland, always has been. When the Brits came, they never brought industrialization with them. They just tortured us and put us on famine ships and sent us back.
I think this is the point at which I should say, in the interests of balance, that there are people who are not entirely on board with that theory of the history of these islands.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, well, you know, the Irish Alzheimer's is you only remember the grudges.
Yeah.
Cattle is our livelihood. I live on 20 acres, and it's a cattle farm. My neighbors are farmers. Most of them are actually blood relatives of mine. I let them use the land or lease the land to graze on. And the Irish government, which is terrible, has decided that we're going to exterminate the cattle population of Ireland because, as you know, Mark, Ireland is a huge island and has something like 50% of the climate change right there in little old County Clare. So they want us to totally change our lifestyle.
Yeah, this isn't an exaggeration. The idea is that you Irishmen, with your incredible levels of bovine flatulence, are going to wash away the Maldives in the Indian Ocean.
Oh yeah, we've got it covered, totally.
Michael, thanks very much. We're going to stay on this topic. The book is out now. Stump the Steyn looms, GB Views at gbnews.uk, and we got lots more straight ahead.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Regrets? I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention.
Regrets? I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention.
You too, huh? It's taken a while, but some people are starting to mention their regrets. In a poll of over 50,000 Australians, the results are very striking. Quote, more than half of respondents either said they regret getting vaccinated or they were unvaccinated and happy with their decision. Only 35% out of more than 45,000 people said they were vaccinated and would make the same decision again. Not a single person said they were unvaccinated and that they regret the decision. Regrets? They don't have any. Alexandra Marshall joins us now from the Spectator Down Under. Something is kind of shifting here, isn't it? It's happening slowly, but it's definitely shifting.
Do you know what's really interesting with those statistics is that the amount of people who don't regret getting vaccinated is about equal to the people who voluntarily took it before they, locked us in our homes and said, you can't come out unless you vaccinate, which just goes to show that if you force people to do something, they tend to regret it later on. But I'm not surprised about the unvaccinated figures because, I'm not worried about dying of coincidence. Do you know what I mean? I don't freak out about that every night when I go to bed. I'm perfectly happy with my choices. And that seems to be a common thing amongst the unvaccinated. We're happy. We're sitting here watching the fallout of all this authoritarianism, and we're fine with it. But also what's interesting is when we search for that survey, the other surveys pop up. And these are the surveys that were done about a year ago where they said something like, about 75% of people are okay with mandating vaccines for everyone unwillingly. So that opinion has changed somewhat.
Yep. I think that's actually great news that it's changed somewhat. You had a tweet a month, 6 weeks, something like that, way back, in which you said something that if you thought that if we were stupid enough to think that people were going to be going to jail over these vaccines, we were idiotic. They were going to pay no price. Do you still think that's true, Alexandra, that governments all over the world that basically force this thing not down the gullets, but into the veins of their citizens, that there is going to be no price paid for it?
Well, there's a reckoning coming, and so there should be. But what I will say is that there's two observations that COVID has taught us. The first is how important constitutions are to limit the tyranny of the majority, because we can see how easy it is for governments to whip the majority up into a frenzy, and how readily our neighbours and our peers will throw us to the wolves because they're frightened of something. And we can see how quickly their minds change. That is not a good idea. It's not a true reflection of society. It is a reaction. And the other thing that we have to look at is how the rhetoric was used against us. I mean, how easy was propaganda 101 that Australians fell for, where we started off with, we'll offer you all the vaccine and then you can go back to work. And it quickly became, we will lock you in at your homes unless you take the vaccine. Now, I've seen a lot of your interviews on here today about how this happened. Well, it was economics that forced people's hand into vaccination long before it was propaganda. They said, you know, if you can't work, then you can't do the jab unless you can work. Now, that's what really got Australians. It was the economic threat. And that is a sign of dictators the world and history over. You start with economics and then you overlay it and consolidate it with propaganda. And that's how Australia fell. We needed the money, so we complied.
Yeah, and in some German states, you were forbidden, if you were unvaccinated, they forbade you at one point to enter a supermarket. So you had to starve to death because you couldn't go and buy food. Austria criminalized the unvaccinated and passed a law saying they would be fined for every 3 months they... I mean, you said about... Let me ask you this, though, because you were talking about the constitutions. We need constitutions to protect us from this. Your great city of Melbourne, which I love, or I used to love, I'm uncertain whether I'll ever see it again, but Melbourne made it was illegal to drive more than 3 miles from your home. Same thing in Dublin. The COVID's gone now, but 2 English cities are likewise saying you can't go more than 10. If you enter go beyond Zone A into Zone B, you'll be fined. The UK, Ireland, Australia, all are basically the same constitution with a little bit of nibbling at the edges. They've provided no protection for their citizens, have they?
Well, first of all, Mark, I'm from Sydney, so Melbourne is always terrible. Thank you very much. But we had similar problems in Sydney where we weren't allowed to go 5 kilometres from our house, which is a problem because Sydney's huge. So, I mean, you basically were locked in a small pen. But the constitutions did prohibit what happened. What our failings were not the constitutions. It was a lack of backbone from our politicians. We had no political opposition, which is the problem that you have elsewhere in the West. There's no conservative power to counteract tyranny. And we have governors and the Governor-General who completely abandoned their responsibility to uphold the sanctity of the Constitution. They're all mates of our politicians. Like, we've now got a Governor of Queensland who was the ex-Chief Health Officer. Talk about a conflict of interest. And in Western Australia, they're the ex-chief of police. So this is who we've got now, safeguarding politicians. This is not how it's meant to work. It's not the plan of the system that's wrong. It's the quality of the people we have in office. And it shows you that no amount of good protection and law will save you from idiots and totalitarians in power. It comes down to the people, what they will accept and what they will go along with. And I will never forget the way people sat in cafes and looked at people standing on the street outside and were just fine with it. They didn't mind, and they let that happen. Now, that was we betrayed ourselves. We really did. So we have to look at that and learn.
No, that's true, but you must be encouraged, Alexandra, at the way, even if these are all the same people who said, oh yeah, that's fine, vaccine mandates, lock them up, let's put them in a camp somewhere in the Northern Territory, that however dishonest they're being about it, they are at least changing their minds.
This is the Santa Claus moment where everyone believed a lie that adults were telling each other. And I hope that now that they're worried about the decision they made and that these polls have come out, that they can at least understand that they were lied to and that people in power and positions of authority do lie for their own interests. So maybe there's a flicker of hope there, Mark, that they have learned that not everything they're told by these authoritarians is 100% on board, and only their own personal fear will moderate that. And we're definitely seeing Australians regretting what they allowed themselves to be conned into. Yeah,
you're right on that. Thank you, Alexandra. And you're also quite right about the pathetic behaviour of His Majesty the King's Australian viceroys in states and at the federal level. That is certainly true as well. We're going to stump it out. Patrick says, I enjoy Mark's bursts into song. Well, you should see a doctor for that, because I think that's the first sign of long COVID, if you start to enjoy my singing. Could we have the whole show done in song? Something like Gilbert and Sullivan, please. I'm trying to think what my favourite Gilbert and Sullivan operetta is. I would have to say The Migrants of Penzance. It's about some Albanian men who show up on the beach one day. It's very colourful. Sir Percival says, is there any point voting in general elections, or should we all just accept that in future we will own nothing, not even an opinion, and pretend to be happy about it? Yes, you're not like the Americans in the sense that UK elections are not totally corrupted and destroyed. The important point, though, is to make sure your vote has value. So it depends on what you're going to do. If you're going to have an alternative party, you're going to make sure that party has united all the various factions and has come together. Mark says, do you think Starmer has met his match in Sunak? I don't think so. It doesn't seem to matter. There are bigger... If you're leader of the opposition, all the government has to do is lose the election. You don't actually have to win it. That'll do it. Dan Wootton is here to give it some Wednesday welly. What you got for us, Dan?
Joe, do you remember Hatun Tash? Now, she was the woman who was arrested at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, even though she had been stabbed by Islamic extremists. Now, the Met Police, who you might call the thought police these days, Mark, have had to pay out £10,000 and apologise for the terrible treatment of this woman. She's going to be here for her first interview. It is a very disturbing and concerning story that I think the mainstream media are ignoring.
Absolutely. Great stuff with Dan. Stay safe, stay free.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for free